Hello, my friends, and welcome to Kurt Berglund's Baseball World. I had to put this video together. I saw two different YouTube videos. Have you been to the YouTube? I saw two different YouTube videos in the last week say something that I don't even understand. And certainly disagree with if I understand it correctly. And I don't want to embarrass anybody, not calling anybody out, but the comment was the same from two different content creators. And that comment was that everybody knows that the Bill James Historical Baseball Abstract version number 1 is very much the same, or largely the same, as the revised version of the Bill James Historical Baseball Abstract. Now, let me say, first of all, that I am fully aware that Bill James does not need defending. He also doesn't need to be attacked either. He can be a very prickly individual, and I am not here to apologize for Bill James by any means. But this book, in its day, published in the 1980s, is a book about the best of the very best players in baseball history. It is broken out. There are also sections about baseball history broken out into decades. And there are some pictures. There's a wonderful index, things that I'm very excited about, as you know from my book reviews. The way of measuring players and rating players in this particular book is to weigh them in two ways. First, by peak value. In other words, how good was this player at his very best? And the second way of evaluating players is by career value. So Bill James, in this particular book, evaluated players in two ways: career and peak value. For each position that is broken out in this book, there's somewhere between 30 and 50 players per position that he writes about, but they're not ranked. Only the top 10 for career and peak value are ranked. You can sort of glean from what he says about the players in the short little blurbs that he has, kind of about where he'd put them. If they're not in that top 10 for career or peak, you'd kind of get an idea, is this guy in the 20s or in the 30s or much further down? All those types of questions, but they're not given a number. In this book, everything is expanded. All of the decade comments are expanded, and none of them that I found are repeated. So the organization is the same. He's using decade comments in both the first edition and the second edition of the book, but what he's saying in those are very different. In this book, in the new version, he's ranking teams, players, World Series, pitchers, in the context of that decade and ranking them. And he's doing it with a new tool that he invented for this book called win shares. So he's not going by career value or peak value. He's going by his new system of win shares, which I'm not going to go into in this video, but basically it's another way of looking at a player's contributions to their team. You could compare win shares to WAR, for example, if you wanted to get a sense of what a win share might look like. There's also a section in this book, in the new version, on the Negro Leagues. He kind of dances around the Negro Leagues in the version of the 1980s, and there's a good reason for it. By the time this book came out, there was a lot more known about the Negro Leagues. And even in this book, he's a little bit cautious about what he's saying about Negro Leagues teams and players. But it's in here. There are pictures. There's an index. But I have no idea how you could look at this book and think, well, they're basically the same. No, they're not. Stop saying that. Because what it's going to do is mislead people who have this book into thinking they don't need this one. But this one is very different. Or vice versa. You might have this one and think, well, this one's not worth getting because it's the same stuff. No, it's not. It's very different. His whole rankings mind shift changed over that, 18-year period, 15-year period between these two books. Now, I understand he's coming out with a third edition, which I'm sure will have more new content. This is not, now there's plenty of books out there, I get it. There's plenty of books out there that the second edition just recycles the first. Totally get it. That's not this book. And if you say that it is, I don't understand what books you're reading. The system, and the position player comments that he has go out to 100 for each player, and then they go even further on a ranking. So he triples the amount of information that he's giving you on players per position. And the comments aren't repeated because he's writing in the context of win shares. So, if you're thinking that you've got one of these two books, and so you really have them both, I want to tell you, you don't. They're very different and very much worth owning in their own right. And if you're thinking they're the same, I would really encourage you to take another look because you're missing, well, everything about the second book. It's not a repeat, and it's valuable in its own right. Each book is valuable in its own way. I think a baseball fan would certainly want a copy of both, and I would encourage you to get one if you don't have them both. And I, for one, am eagerly awaiting the third edition of the Bill James Historical Baseball Abstract. So this has just been a response to two different YouTubers that I've seen talk about these books as if they're one thing, and I just strongly disagree. If you're in the market for books, get them both. Thank you and have a great evening. So long, everybody.